Girl Undercover, Episode 5. Written by Julia Derrick. He was already standing beneath a street lamp at the corner of 60th and West End Avenue when I arrived a couple of minutes before 9, right on time for once. He was just outside the modern high-rise building the victim had been found in. The moment before the traffic light turned red, I jogged over to the quiet street where Ian was waiting. "Hey," I said as I stopped in front of him. Unlike me, he was wearing a suit, a tie, and dress shoes. "What's with the formal attire? You have a hot date later?" He shot me a quick grin and his eyes glittered with humor. I thought that was what this was. "Are you telling me it isn't?" I wasn't about to dignify that silly comeback with a reply. He peered closer at me. "Wow, you really do look different with those glasses." "I can't say the same for you. You don't care if someone recognizes you?" He shrugged, and his face went suddenly serious. "Not really. Let's go." "Wait, how are we getting past the doorman? I doubt they'll let us in the building after what has happened there." Ian pulled out his wallet and flipped it open for me. Under the light of the street lamp, I could easily see his FBI ID and badge inside the wallet. I leaned closer to get a better view. The photo was indeed of Ian. I noted that he had told me the truth about his age. If that was in fact a real ID, I was very familiar with fake IDs, and just because this one looked authentic, it didn't mean it was. I asked Ian if it was real. He chuckled. Yeah, I wasn't lying when I told you I used to be an FBI special agent. I haven't lied to you about anything." This was not the time to start questioning that statement, so I just said, "I'm surprised the Bureau let you keep it." "They didn't? I claimed to have lost both my ID and badge when I was fired. There wasn't much they could do about that, so now I can use both during occasions like this one. And if I dress like an agent, I'm much more likely to be taken seriously." "Makes sense. What about me? I don't exactly look like a federal agent wearing this." I pointed with both hands at my casual outfit. Ian patted my shoulder. "Don't worry. As long as you stay behind me, we should be fine. If worse comes to worst, I'll just tell them you're new and don't quite know how to dress properly yet." I smirked at him. "Come on," he urged. "I highly doubt anyone will ask, so let's go." We went up to the building entrance together. There was a doorman behind a podium immediately to our left when we entered. Ian flashed his open wallet to the chunky man there with the red cheeks. "FBI," he stated in a stern voice. "We're here to investigate the murder of Belinda Jones. What apartment was she in?" 22C, the doorman quickly responded, standing up straighter. Indicating a bank of elevators at the other end of the spacious entrance hall, he added, "You can take one of those elevators." "Thank you," Ian said, and strode toward the elevators. I was one step behind him, and soon the two of us were in an elevator together, riding up to the 22nd floor. "Impressive," I said as the elevator quickly climbed several floors. "You almost had me fooled. Now let's see if the NYPD will be as easy to get out of the way. Since the body was discovered only a few hours ago, I'm sure there might be detectives investigating the crime scene still." "I'm not so sure about that," Ian said. "It's more than a few hours ago. My guess is they've left for the day, but even if they haven't, I'll take care of it." "I'll be very interested to see how you'll do that." As the elevator reached the 22nd floor, it pinged and the door spread open. Ian turned to me before we exited. "Don't worry," he whispered and nodded for us to get going. "It'll be okay." The long, softly lit hallway we entered was empty and quiet. In either direction, there were light gray apartment doors as far as one could see. A metallic plaque on the wall immediately outside the elevator showed us which way apartment 22C was. We hurried in that direction and soon spotted the front door, which was ajar. As we approached it, no sounds came from inside the apartment. suggesting that maybe the NYPD had already left for the day. Could we really be so lucky? Ian went up to the door and pushed it open all the way. The inside of the apartment was bathing in light, and a man dressed in a suit and tie stood at a doorway farther down the foyer. He was short and stocky with shiny black hair. He looked like he was of Hispanic or maybe Filipino descent. He turned toward us and frowned while at the same time adjusting his tie. "This is a crime scene. No civilians are allowed here. Please leave immediately." He must be a detective, I thought. Ian pulled out his wallet and brandished his ID and badge again. "We're not civilians. We're from the FBI. I'm Special Agent Ian Armory. We're taking over this case. There have been similar rape murders taking place all across the East Coast. You can go now." The scowling cop came toward us and did not look pleased as he glanced at Ian's ID. He didn't attempt to challenge what Ian had just stated, however. I wasn't surprised. What Ian had said and the way he'd said it, with the authority of someone who knew what he was talking about, was a great lie. If in fact there were similar rape-murder cases going on across several states, the FBI would know about it before the NYPD. There really wasn't much this detective could say except openly accuse Ian of lying. He wouldn't find out the truth until at the very earliest the following morning, as it would take a while before someone at the bureau could confirm no agent had been dispatched on such a case. But the detective didn't appear confident enough to confront Ian. All he did was open and close his mouth like a fish a couple of times before finally shutting it, and then he marched past Ian and me. I heard him leave the apartment and even shut the door after himself. As soon as the door clicked shut, I threw a glance over my shoulder to make sure he was really gone. The bright foyer was empty. "Wow. Now that was truly impressive," I whispered to Ian just in case there were other cops still in the apartment. I doubted it since they must have heard our interaction and would have joined their colleague in that case. "Thanks. Of course, this bloke must have just gotten his promotion to detective, so it wasn't very hard." "Yeah," maybe I nodded. "Let's hope he won't be fired for falling so easily for your hoax." "I'm sure he'll be fine." Ian walked up to the doorway that was crisscrossed with yellow crime scene tape and climbed over it with his long legs, disappearing into the room. I went to the other end of the apartment to make sure there truly were no more people in the rest of it. I entered a big living room furnished sparsely but tastefully in pastel colors and wood, and then into the adjacent kitchen. Both areas were empty, and so were the bathroom and walk-in closet I checked next. Every square foot of the apartment looked tidy, suggesting there had been no fights of any kind. I left the bathroom and crossed the hallway back toward the room Ian had disappeared into. The bedroom. Being shorter than Ian, it was more of a struggle for me to get over the crime scene tape, but I finally managed to climb over it. The spacious bedroom was dominated by a white four-poster, king-sized bed placed in the middle of it. The light sheets and covers were stained with blood and all jumbled up, but other than that, the room looked in order, and the cream-colored carpet covering the floor was pristine. The open window at the other end of the room provided a mild breeze that made the tip of a sheet flutter. Ian was by the window, gazing out into the night. I walked around the space, scanning the area while being careful not to touch anything as that might leave fingerprints or mess up those of others. I stopped at the bed and noted that thin, white rope had been tied to the four posts, and that it looked like it had been severed. I remembered then that the newscaster had mentioned that this woman, too, had been found tied to the bed. Presumably, she had also been violated in this state. Unlike the popular book 50 Shades of Grey that contained such bondage scenes, I doubted she had been enjoying herself. I shuddered as I saw just how much blood was spattered all over the bed. One could only hope the rapist was a necrophiliac, preferring his victims dead before violating them. I noted that the rope seemed expensive, like it was made of rare silk. Other than this observation, I didn't see anything else that seemed important. It struck me what a waste of time it was for us to be here. How would we be able to solve this case without having access to specific crime scene information? We didn't know how the victim had been found. Surely there was lots of crucial details not yet released to the public regarding the other rapes as well. Without them, we were fumbling in the dark. I huffed quietly. Why had I gotten Ian the nut job to convince me to come here, risking revealing my identity? The 2 threatening texts in my phone came back to me then, and I knew why I was here. I wouldn't have been able to stay home until George called to tell me who had texted me. It would have driven me crazy. At the time, it had seemed better to do something, anything, to try to catch this bastard. I sighed and thought, well, I might as well do the best of the situation since I'm already here. I turned toward the window where Ian was still standing. "What are you doing there?" I asked as I joined him. "I think the rapist might have entered this way." I stuck my head out the big window and peered out into the dark night. We weren't facing the street but the back of another building. I turned my head to see what the ground below looked like. I could barely see all the way down, it was so dark out, and the distance to the courtyard so huge. I experienced a brief moment of vertigo that made my stomach stir. I glanced sideways and immediately felt better. I thought. In addition to how far down to the ground it was, the building's walls were made of glass and metal. They were completely smooth. How would someone be able to climb such a building? I asked Ian that. "Are you claiming the perp is like Spider-Man?" I added. "Yes, he might very well be like Spider-Man." I raised a brow. "Really? You do know that Spider-Man is a superhero cartoon, right? Or do the Brits believe he actually exists?" "In that case, let me enlighten you, he doesn't." Ian kept looking down the building and sideways. Since none of the doormen have reported any strange men entering the building in the last 24 hours, and none of the neighbors saw anyone strange, it seems the perp must have entered through the window. Why else would the window be open? Do you believe the cops opened it? I shrugged. Considering how naive that detective was, I wouldn't rule it out. It's possible the perp is someone who lives in the building? Or maybe one of the doormen is in on it? I considered this. That's where I'd put my money. On a doorman. I wouldn't. This exact scenario took place in one of the other rape beatings. None of the doormen and neighbors reported anything unusual, and the bedroom window had been left open in that case as well. So unless you believe the doormen in several buildings are in on it, it's unlikely. In any case, it's only a matter of hours before we find out if the window was open when this latest victim was discovered. I took a closer look at him. Really? How do you know so many details about the other cases? And this one too, now that I think about it. Don't tell me you've marched into a station and demanded access to all the police reports. I narrowed my eyes at him. You bribed someone, didn't you? He smiled at me. No, but I would if I had to. Luckily, I'm blessed with other resources. As I crossed my arms over my chest and tilted my head sideways, eager to hear exactly how Ian was blessed, my phone rang in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw that George was trying to contact me. "Excuse me," I said to Ian and stepped away from the window. I answered the phone and told George to hold on a few moments. I didn't want to speak with him when Ian was nearby in case he had anything to do with the texts. Climbing over the crime scene tape, I was back in the hallway. I walked into the living room and put the phone back to my ear. "Sorry about that," I said. "I assume you heard my message." "Yeah, I did, and I checked out the number you mentioned. It was made from a computer with a Skype account. Those numbers will often give you an automated message claiming the number is no longer in service." "Okay." I threw a glance over my shoulder to ensure Ian hadn't snuck after me. I leaned against the wall so I had a good view of the entire room. "Is that all you found out? Not the name of the owner to the Skype account?" "Unfortunately, I can't see that at the moment. All I can tell you is that it's someone in the Manhattan area. Does that help?" Yes, it does, thanks. It didn't really help since I had already assumed the caller was from the New York area, but George was trying so hard that I didn't want to complain. Is everything okay, Gabi? Yeah, it's fine. As fine as it would ever get with Nick gone. But again, I didn't want to complain. You sure? George sounded worried. Definitely. I made myself smile as I knew that would translate into my voice. I was just freaking out a little when I got a text from this weird number, but it's nothing. How are things back home? Any progress on Nick's investigation? As far as I can tell, they're getting nowhere. Really? Well, I guess I shouldn't be so surprised. The answer can only be found here. Hey, I've gotta go. Thanks for checking for me. No problem, Gabi. If there's anything I can do for you, don't hesitate to call me. I thanked him again, and then we disconnected. Before I stuck my phone back into my pocket, I checked to see if there was another nasty text from the Skype account. There wasn't. Too bad. If another one had come while I was here with Ian, I could be almost certain he had nothing to do with them, unless he knew of a way to send them while he wasn't at his computer. Which I doubted he did. Only someone as skilled with computers as George would be able to come up with a trick like that. I still need to be careful around him. I walked back to the room where he had remained at the window. He glanced at me as I came up to him. Your lover, he asked, amusement playing in his chameleon eyes. I was about to tell him that it was none of his business, but before I changed my mind. It was actually good if he thought that. Maybe he would stop flirting with me now. I gave him a tiny but pleased smile. How did you know? Instinct, he said curtly, and I could have sworn a shadow fell over his face. I opened my mouth to ask him about the supposed resources he'd been blessed with that enabled him to find out details about the other cases, but he beat me to the punch by saying, "Hey, there's something you should see." He leaned out the window and held up his smartphone, shining its flashlight down the building wall. I leaned out as well to see what he was referring to. Do you see that, he asked, and pointed toward a series of greasy marks on the wall right below the bedroom window. The marks, which looked very much like human handprints, I quickly discovered, reached as far as my eyes could see in the light of Ian's surprisingly potent smartphone flashlight. Are you talking about those handprints? I asked just to confirm. Yes. How do you think they got there? Unless someone climbed up the building. I chuckled and shook my head like I thought he was really grasping for straws here. Maybe the building has been worked on or had its walls cleaned. One or more of the workers must have left them on the building. Ian gazed at me incredulously. Why would they do that? I shrugged. I'm not familiar with how building cleaners and construction workers operate, but it seems a lot more plausible they touched the wall for some reason than some kind of human hybrid climbing the wall like Spider-Man. Maybe the workers got stuck somehow and needed to use their hands to move up or down the building while on their lift. Ian turned off his flashlight and pulled in his hand. So then you believe someone hired at a cleaning or construction company might be behind the rapes? I thought about his words that had been delivered rather sarcastically. Sure, why not? It's not a bad theory. Much better than yours. He gave me a long look, then shook his head and chuckled. Fine. Except I'm pretty sure this is the first glass skyscraper in which a victim has been found, but I'll double check. Right. I was wondering about that. Please do explain how you know all these not yet released details about the other cases. I'd be happy to. I hacked the NYPD's computer system and read the police reports. I stared at him, not sure why his words had surprised me that much. At this point, nothing that came out of Ian's mouth should have this effect on me. It must have been the nonchalant way he'd said it that had me thrown, as if hacking the NYPD's computer system was a piece of cake. Besides, I wasn't sure I believed him. I crossed my arms over my chest and leaned against the wall, contemplating him with a raised chin. You did, huh? And why didn't you tell me earlier you were so good with computers? He shrugged lightly. You never asked, and it never came up. Anyway, computer science was my specialty when I was with the Bureau. I narrowed my eyes at Ian again, my bullshit radar going off. What he said didn't make sense. If he could break the security shield to one of the world's best police departments, maybe the best, why would he need me to go through Nikki's computers to find out what politicians were members there? I asked him that. Because the Adler Group's security is incredibly hacker-proof, I'm sad to say. He inhaled deeply, as if very frustrated with this. Then he gave me a lopsided little smile, suddenly over the frustration. That's why I need you to find them for me. Wow. That's some security, I muttered, still not entirely convinced what he was telling me was the truth. But since I didn't have anything to say to contradict his claim, I decided to move on. Literally, I had spent enough time sniffing through this place. Until I'd seen the police reports, all of which I was going to insist Ian showed me in person, there wasn't much more we could do. I wanted to see the old reports about the first 3 cases, and the initial one regarding this case the patrol officer must have filed. Hey, it's getting late. We should leave. We can continue discussing this case when we've seen the latest police reports. Maybe the NYPD have a suspect finally after today's rape? We can hope, but I doubt it. They don't know what they're dealing with here. Yeah, and you do? I thought but didn't say. Okay, Ian continued. Let's leave and touch base tomorrow. We left the apartment in silence. An hour later I was back at my place, at last allowed to get some rest for my exhausted body. When I woke up the following morning, I turned on the TV as I got ready for work. I wanted to hear the latest news. There was nothing else reported about Felix Bose, and certainly nothing about how Ian and I had pretended to be from the FBI and hijacked an ongoing police investigation. The latter wasn't surprising. I didn't think that piece of highly embarrassing information would ever be made public, as it would reflect badly on the NYPD, making them look like amateurs. Surely, though, by now the detective in question had realized he'd been duped and was taking the heat for that one way or another. There was a short piece about the latest rape on the morning news. Again, the anchor emphasized how there were no suspects and reminded everyone that the NYPD had issued a reward for any information leading to an arrest. So Ian was right. It pained me more than I wanted to admit to myself. I could only hope there would be a suspect when I found out who the management company was for Belinda Jones's building. As soon as I got a chance, I'd call them to see if any cleaning or construction company had been working on the building recently. It was only a matter of time before the NYPD did the same when detectives discovered those handprints on the building wall. Well, if they discovered them. I really hoped they stuck their heads out the window and looked around. If they did, surely they would come to the same conclusion as I had. I was relieved not to hear from Ian during the first part of the day. I could use a break from him. There was plenty of time for us to talk about the rape cases when I saw him for our next session, which unfortunately was as soon as tomorrow. In addition to speaking to the management company, I needed to think about what else I could do to figure out who was behind Nick's death. So far, I had gotten nowhere, and that had to change. When I had a break in the afternoon, I Googled the building and found the name of the management company. Going over in a corner at the club to get some privacy, I called them up. I was soon connected to the person who handled Miss Jones's particular building. "This is Patty Schmidt," a pleasant female voice said. "How can I help you?" "Hello, my name is Mary Adams, and I'm one of the tenants in 120 West End Avenue," I said with authority. "I'm calling to complain about all the noise those guys working outside the building are making. I can't hear my own thoughts. It's so loud." I doubted this woman knew every tenant by name, given that about 500 people lived in the huge skyscraper, so I wasn't worried that she'd instantly realize I was full of it. "I'm sorry about that," the woman said. You must be referring to the cleaning company that was there a few days ago. We've already severed ties with the company as we have received several complaints about their noisiness. I apologize for any inconvenience this has caused you, but please be assured it will never happen again. I knew it. I felt a big grin spread across my lips. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for taking care of that for us. They were really a nuisance. Of course. Again, I apologize for any inconvenience. No problem. We said goodbye and hung up. I left the corner, still grinning big. Now I couldn't wait till I saw Ian next so I could tell him about my conversation with the building's management company. Obviously, we weren't dealing with some violent human hybrid that climbed skyscrapers. Those handprints were the remnants of sloppy building workers, just like I had thought. Surely it would turn out that one of those workers could be tied to the other buildings where women had been found dead in their beds. I decided to get a workout in before my next client, and at the same time see if I could find anything to help my own investigation along. I climbed the stairs up to the 4th floor where the trainers' locker rooms were to change into workout clothes. As I went into the locker room, I discovered Emma there, rooting around in her locker. She didn't seem to notice that I was entering. "Hey, Emma," I said and opened my locker. She stopped what she was doing and turned to face me. She was paler than normal and her skin looked clammy, like she was sick. "Oh, hi, Jamie," she replied, her voice high and shallow. "How are you doing?" "I'm good, just about to go work out." I took a closer look at her. She really didn't look well. "But how are you doing? Are you feeling okay?" She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. "Yes, I'm just feeling a little queasy. I think I ate something that didn't sit well with me for lunch." "Oh, I'm sorry. What did you eat?" Salmon with Brussels sprouts. The salmon must have been old." "Yuck, that's not good. You should go down and complain." Emma shook her head. "No, it's no use. It's never happened before, and I don't want to be a pest." "I don't think you're a pest if you point out that something might have been off with the salmon. You're doing them a favor by letting them know, actually." Emma slammed her locker shut and rushed past me then, covering her mouth with her hand. Soon, she was out of the trainer's area and on the gym floor. I followed her to see if she was okay. As I came out on the gym floor, she disappeared into the nearby women's restroom. I walked into the restroom, just in time to hear someone retch, and then the sound of stuff that could only be one thing land in a toilet bowl. There were 2 stalls in this restroom, and one was open, which meant that Emma must be in the other. I leaned against the door to her stall and heard her throw up again. "Emma, is there something I can do? You sound really, really bad." The sound of heavy breathing came from the stall, and then she gagged again. I walked over to the sink and poured ice-cold water on some paper towels. When she got out, she could use them for her face. I remained quiet as I waited for her to finish her business in the stall. A couple of minutes later, she came out looking gray and clammy and wobbly. I handed her a couple of the wet paper towels. She mumbled thanks and dabbed her face. "Are you sure you're okay?" I asked. That sounded pretty bad. I nodded toward the stall she had just exited. She waved a hand dismissively. "I'll be fine," then she managed a weak smile. "Now that the damn salmon is out of me." She proceeded to wash her hands and face under the running faucet. Wiping her face with more paper towels, she said, "Really, I'll be okay. Thanks for trying to help, but I'm fine now." "Okay," I said, not as convinced as she seemed to be. But the tone of her voice told me she really didn't want me to be there, so I left. As I returned to the locker room, I thought back to when I'd had lunch myself today just to be sure I hadn't had the bad salmon. I often ate salmon in the cafeteria. Thankfully, I had chosen an egg white omelet with toast for lunch earlier. I suddenly remembered that I'd spotted Emma eating there as well then. And she had not been eating salmon with Brussels sprouts like she'd claimed, but scrambled eggs and sliced tomatoes. I remembered because I had checked out her plate and thought hers looked so tasty, regretting having asked for egg whites, not whole eggs, for my own. That's weird, I thought as I pulled off my trainer's shirt. Then I shrugged. Maybe she'd just mixed up the days and it was really the eggs that were bad. A light wave of nausea went through me at the thought. Well, I supposed I could look forward to hanging over a toilet bowl myself later. Oh, she did she? Ian said, as we were walking down the stairs to Nikki's functional training area where I would train him. I had just finished telling him about my conversation with the woman in charge of Belinda Jones's apartment building, and how there had been cleaners working the walls outside. We entered the area and walked up to the huge metallic frame from which TRX straps hung like black and yellow swing sets. We would use the straps to warm up. I was pleased to see that few members and trainers were around, giving us plenty of room to talk privately. She did indeed, I replied, and adjusted the TRX straps so we could begin. I handed Ian the handles and told him to start squatting and pulling himself back up to a standing position repeatedly, which means we need to investigate the men working at the other buildings. Ian gazed at me for a moment. You're telling me you know there were workers at the other buildings as well? Yes, I am, I said, even though I didn't. But surely men had been working at the other buildings too. It was the only logical explanation. The rapist had to be one of them. How funny that none of the police reports mentioned there were workers of any kind at any of the buildings, Ian said, as he squatted and pulled himself back up. The reports are quite thorough. I'm surprised they would have missed something so pertinent to the case, especially given that the window was open at the time of arrival of the patrol officer. I gave him a calm smile. Maybe they didn't think of this possibility yet. I'm sure it's only a matter of time before they do, though. After all, it's only after Belinda Jones that they have 2 cases in which there are similarities to speak of. Remember, the first house he entered was a brownstone where the front door was unlocked. I couldn't stop myself from giving him a teasing little grin. And can you imagine, just as they were about to discover these similarities, the FBI came and interrupted them. Actually, there are more similarities. Ian finished his squat rows and stood back up, as usual not being out of breath at all. The guy wasn't even sore from our first session together, which kind of annoyed me, I had to admit. For one, all the victims were found with a piece of white cloth stuffed into their mouths, and don't forget that all were tied to a bed frame or to trees with expensive white silk rope. An image of Bose telling me to open my mouth so he could stuff that big piece of white cloth there flashed through my mind. It was followed by another more disturbing one of Nick, his mouth stuffed with white cloth. Could my assault and Nick's murder be linked together with these raped and beaten women? No, Nick had not been tied to anything, I reminded myself. I would also need to see the police reports Ian claimed to be able to hack into with my own eyes before I could take anything he said seriously. I thought you were going to contact me regarding the police reports yesterday, I said. What happened? I didn't hear from him the entire day, which had been a huge relief, but he didn't need to know that. I got busy, Ian replied, and began doing the TRX chest presses I wanted him to do next. I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were that eager to hear from me again. He grinned at me, clearly delighted with himself. I rolled my eyes. No, I was only eager to hear about the police reports. I want to see their contents with my own eyes. I hope that won't be a problem. Not at all. But for that you will have to come to my apartment. Will you be okay with that? Why wouldn't I be okay with that? I quickly shot back, even though I wasn't eager to be alone with Ian at his place. But I wasn't about to let that show. I don't know, he said, and did the rowing exercises I asked him to do next. Sometimes I get the feeling you don't trust me, and that I'm out to hurt you. Nothing could be farther from the truth. If you say so. I gave him a flat smile. I was getting tired of this guy not breaking a sweat or getting out of breath when I trained him. He was young and strong and injury-free. He wouldn't hurt himself if I pushed him some more, which was exactly what I was about to do. I wanted to see him hurt a little, wipe off that smug expression that so often was on his face. "Hey, how about we do some sprints on the track?" I asked, and nodded at the track outside all the windows on one side of the spacious workout area. The running track ran around the entire health club and measured a sixth of a mile. Everyone loved to use it when the weather allowed for it. Today was one of those days, early spring, not too hot, not too cold. A perfect day to exercise outside. "You mentioned you wanted to improve your cardiovascular fitness," I added. "Interval training is a great way to achieve that goal." "Sure, why not?" Ian said. So we took off toward the glass doors that would let us out onto the red rubber track. I said hi to a couple of the trainers as we walked along the track toward the area where there was a clock on the wall. I would use it to time Ian as he ran around the club. "Okay," I said and stopped next to the clock. "I want you to run as fast as you can around the building. Can you do that for me?" "Sure," Ian said. "Just tell me when." He got in position to take off. I threw a glance at the clock on the brick wall and waited a few seconds until the second hand neared the 12. "Ready, set, go." Ian took off sprinting, taking long, powerful strides, and soon disappeared around the first corner of the high rise that housed Nikki. I knew it would take him at least another 30 seconds before I'd be able to see him come around the fourth corner where I was standing. I turned my face toward the warm sun and enjoyed the rays against my skin. I was inside so much these days I missed feeling it on me. It just couldn't be healthy being inside that much. I pondered briefly whether I should ask Ian to do some deeper research on Felix Bose while I was at his place. If he was as good a hacker as he claimed, you'd think he'd be able to dig up some useful information. This way, I wouldn't have to bother George again. I was barely able to finish that thought when Ian came flying around the corner in front of which I was standing. He stopped next to me and bent over, supporting his elbows against his knees while catching his breath. "Good job," I said, and meant it. He'd covered that sixth of a mile in 45 seconds, which was very fast. "Now I want you to go down in a plank position for 1 minute and stay there until it's time for the next interval, okay?" Without a word, Ian went down into a plank, his elbows and toes against the red rubber track. He held the position for the time I wanted, and then took off for a second interval. This time around, he barely made 50 seconds, and his face had gotten red at last as he sank down into another plank position. I couldn't help but grin as he was stretched out on his elbows and toes on the ground. Finally, he was feeling it a little. By the time he finished all 10 intervals I wanted him to do, Ian was drenched in sweat. As we left the running track, he was still breathing hard. "Great job out there," I said as we walked toward the stairs that would take us back up to the 4th floor. "Thanks," Ian said and stopped by a water fountain, drinking tons of water. When he was done, he wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "That was intense. Have you found any politicians in the system?" I should have known he wouldn't wait very long until he started to prod me about the spying he wanted me to do for him. "Which I wouldn't do ever." I smiled at him. "Maybe," I said. "How about we do some rowing intervals and then I'll tell you?" He looked at me for a long, penetrating moment. Then he shrugged. "Fine." We walked up to the 5th floor where the rowing machines were, and I helped Ian strap himself into one of them. When we had completed 10 intervals, I could tell he was beat, even though he pretended like he could do more. I had finally gotten what I wanted. A completely smug-free client. He deserved a nice, long stretch now. I waited for him to drink another gallon of water at a nearby water fountain. Then I gave him a fresh towel to wipe off the sweat that kept pouring forth on his face. I pointed to a stretching area that no one else occupied, and we walked over there. He plopped down on the towels I had spread out on the black mat, lying face up, arms and legs extended. I sat down in front of his feet. Grabbing his ankles, I pulled him to create space between the discs and his spine. He closed his eyes and was quiet for once. I hoped, but doubted it would last long. I grabbed one of his feet and stretched the back of his leg. In order to do so, I needed to lean over him so our faces met. He opened his eyes then and looked right into mine. "So who did you find?" "What do you mean?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what he meant. He looked around us as if to ensure we were alone. "The politicians? How many members have you gone through?" "A couple of hundred," I replied and looked away, scolding myself mentally for not holding his gaze. Could I be more obvious in my deceit? "Liar," he whispered. "Please start looking. I don't have that much time and neither do you. Any of us. I don't want to have to threaten to reveal your cover, but I will if you don't do as I say. Please don't make me have to do that." I bent and turned his leg sideways so I could stretch his buttock. His words had made me so furious I was pushing his thigh really hard. I could see him tense under me. Maybe this was not the best time to bring that up. "Maybe not," I said, not smiling. "I can do things to you that you might not like either." He smiled. I don't doubt that for a second. Something in his eyes changed then. The edge that had been there went away and was replaced with what could only be described as warmth and compassion. "How are you doing?" he asked quietly. "What do you mean?" This time I really had no idea what he meant. "The last couple of months can't have been easy for you? How are you coping?" I looked away again, but only because I couldn't stand the expression on his face, the kind way in which he was suddenly contemplating me. I couldn't let myself get close to him in any way, become the friend I sensed he wanted me to become. My guard needed to remain firmly in place. This man is crazy and cannot be trusted, Gabi. But even as I told myself this, my throat closed up and tears were about to fill my eyes. I made myself think about how he had just threatened to reveal my identity if I didn't do what he wanted, wrapping the threat with a tough love feel, as if he'd had no choice but to say those words. I was supposed to believe that he did it for the greater good. That part of the world was conspiring against us, the way they did in the X-Files toward Mulder and Scully. Yeah, right. Suddenly, the tears that burned the back of my eyes dried, and the softness in my chest disappeared. I became hard and unbreakable again. This guy was a lunatic, and possibly also a rapist. A computer whiz like him would have no problem texting me from an anonymous Skype account, even though he wasn't in front of it at the time. Okay, I didn't really think he was the rapist, especially not since he needed me to find stuff for him, and who knew how long that would take, but I could never forget that it was still possible. I glanced down at him again. "I'm fine. Don't worry about me. I'll start going through those names for you tomorrow." We continued stretching in silence, then confirmed the next session for 2 days later. He reminded me that I was welcome to come over to his place to check out the police reports anytime I wanted. "I might come tomorrow night," I said. By then I would have had time to figure out the name of the cleaning company at Belinda Jones's building and see if it had also been at the other buildings in some capacity. If it had, we should be able to narrow down potential suspects, and I could prove to Ian that I had been right all along. "Okay," Ian said, and we parted ways. The following day, I walked over to Belinda Jones's apartment building to ask the doorman for the name of the cleaning company that had been working the building. Because I couldn't count on it being a different doorman. I had styled my hair in curls and wore no glasses. I was also wearing lots of makeup as well as a revealing dress. Hopefully this way I'd seem like another person. It turned out I had gone through all that effort in vain. Another doorman was on duty after all. Well, looking a little sexy never hurt. I walked up to him with a smile on my face. I needed him to like me since I wasn't a tenant in the building and had no business asking the kinds of questions I was about to ask. He returned my smile with a big one of his own. Well, so far, my approach seemed to be working. "Hi, my name is Elsa," I began. "How are you today?" "Hello, Elsa," the grinning doorman said. "I'm fine. How about yourself?" "I'm fine. Thank you very much. I was wondering if you know the name of the cleaning company that was working on this building in the last week. I live in the building next door and they were really loud. I want to talk to their manager." The doorman looked confounded. "What cleaning company? This building hasn't been cleaned since last summer." "Are you sure about that?" When I called related management, they told me several of the tenants here had been complaining about the company being too noisy. "I'm very sure, miss. I know everything that goes on in this building, and it only gets cleaned once a year. Related must have been referring to another building. I know there was one on 56th and West End that got cleaned last week." "Really?" "Yes. The last time someone was here to work on the building in any capacity was last fall." There was a coolness to him now, the smile having shriveled. He was clearly not in the mood to talk to me any longer, so I thanked him and left. As soon as I was around the corner, I called related management again to talk to Patty. What was going on here? Why was I getting conflicting stories? As I waited for Patty Schmidt to pick up, I wondered if maybe this doorman was in on the rapes somehow. He had turned on me awfully fast. Patty was soon on the phone with me. Unfortunately, 5 minutes later, I had found out that the doorman had been telling the truth all along. Patty had simply confused two buildings, exactly like he had suggested. There had been no company either cleaning or working at Belinda Jones's building in the last several months. As I was walking along the sidewalk back toward my own apartment building, I was groveling. I was so not looking forward to the smug expression I was sure would spring forth as soon as I told Ian no workers had been outside the building after all. I squeezed my fists in frustration. I, of course, still didn't believe we were dealing with some freak who could climb skyscrapers like Spider-Man. Well, if I was lucky, by the time Ian and I were going through the latest police reports tonight, the NYPD had finally come up with some suspects.